Okay, now, when I did my last set of videos, I finished the book of Deuteronomy. However, oh no, you have to do this, don't you? It's part of your nature. You were completely fine until I sat down here and started to work on this, weren't you? Yeah, you were. You have to bother me. You have to. You can't not do it. Go over there and deal with the other cats. Anyway, so last time I did this, I finished the book of Deuteronomy. However, I made a mistake when I was closing out my software, my recording software program, and I did not save the last video I did. Well, you're warm, cat. I can tell you were sitting in the window just now. I did not save the last video I did, the last little bit of Deuteronomy. So right now, before I get into the book of Joshua, I'm going to have to go back and re-record myself going through the end of Deuteronomy. So we're going to be starting on Deuteronomy 32, verse 48. On that same day, the Lord told Moses. So this is all the same day. This is all happening on the same day. Moses' farewell address to the people. I believe the majority of this is kind of a speech that he would have written out ahead of time and spoken to the people as he read it off of whatever scroll he had written. It's possible that some of it would have been written on that day as he was, commemorating the events of that last day. It's also possible that go away from that. It's also possible that a little bit of it may have been added by a priest or a scribe later, describing the events of that last day. Especially his death, obviously. But even some of his movements that may have been added by a priest at some later time. But most of this book would have been written by Moses probably ahead of time as a sort of speech that he was reading off to the Israelites. And apparently it's all taking place on the same day. So on that same day, the Lord told Moses, no, you've got to stop doing that. That's not the Lord told Moses. I'm telling this to the cat. Just leave that alone. Seriously, just leave that alone. This is a very, very, very stubborn cat. She does not respond quickly to... She's very stubborn. Oh my, what are you doing? What are you looking at? Very intelligent, very crafty. And she does not give up her plans very easily. It is difficult to dissuade this cat from doing whatever it is she wants to do. Anyway, so here's what the Lord told Moses. Go up into the Abiram range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I am giving the Israelites as their own possession. There, on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die, and you will be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the desert of Zin, and because you do not uphold my holiness among the Israelites. Therefore you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel. This is the blessing that Moses, the man of God, pronounced on the Israelites before his death. He said, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned over them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came with myriads of holy ones from the south, from the mountain slopes, whatever that means. Surely it is you who love the people. All the holy ones are in your hand. At your feet they all bow down, and from you they receive instruction. The law that Moses gave us, the possession of the assembly of Jacob. He was king over Jeshurun. There's that Jeshurun, that weird upright one terminology again. He was king over Jeshurun when the leaders of the people assembled, along with the tribes of Israel. So God is supposed to be their king. They will eventually want a separate human king. But God is supposed to be their king. Yeah. You gotta stop this. You gotta stop this right now, Cat. What's your problem? I'm not going to let you do that either. You know not to walk on keyboards. I have my keyboard on my lap. The cats know not to walk on my keyboards. I have trained them to do that. You gotta be trained now not to bother my camera. You want so badly to knock that off. You just want so badly to do that. But I'm not gonna let you. I'm gonna fight you every step of the way, Cat. I'm gonna sit right here. What are you gonna do? Yes, you're gonna sit right here and be calm. There, yeah. Okay, you can stay right there. Let Reuben live and not die, nor his men be few. There's a footnote down here saying, but let his men be few. And this he said about Judah. Here, so we're not doing these in birth order, because we went from number 1 down to number 4, so we're not doing these in birth order. He said this about Judah. Hear, O Lord, the cry of Judah. Bring him to his people. With his own hands he defends his cause. Oh, be his help against his foes. About Levi, he said, your Thummim and Urim belong to the man you favored. You tested him at Massah. You contended with him at the waters of Meribah. He said of his father and mother, I have no regard for them. He did not recognize his brothers or acknowledge his own children, but he watched over your word and guarded your covenant. This would be referring to the incidents where the priest stood up for God when the people were betraying him, such as when the Moabite and Midianite women infiltrated the people and seduced them away from God, and Phinehas, I think it led up the Levites to attack them and kill the evildoers, or when they were doing it at the golden calf way back in Exodus, and the faithful priest took the charge in cleansing Israel from its wrongdoing by going after the leaders of the rebellion, whether they were friends or whoever they were. So that's what he's talking about here. So these are the priests, the faithful high priests, who put their holiness before God ahead of their family or friends, if it comes to that. He teaches your precepts to Jacob and your law to Israel. He offers incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Okay, you gotta stop that too. You just leave all this stuff alone. You go up there. Oh, yeah, there you go. Bless all his skills, O Lord, and be pleased with the work of his hands. Smite the loins of those who rise up against him. Strike his foes till they rise no more. About Benjamin, he said, let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. About Joseph, he said, may the Lord bless his hand with the precious dew from heaven above, and with deep waters that lie below. So there's another reference to the idea that there's water under the earth. I mean, we know that there's groundwater in the earth. We read about the Egyptians digging to find water after the Nile turned bad. But it's part of their view of the world that not only was there an ocean above, but the sky was a dome holding out the waters above, which we saw back in Genesis. That was a big major part of the flood. The flood was coming from two sources: the oceans above and then the oceans below. But they also believe there's oceans below. That's just part of how they saw the world. That's how they believe the world was set up. With the best the sun brings forth, and the finest the moon can yield, with the choicest gifts of the ancient mountains, and the fruitfulness of the everlasting hills, with the best gifts of the earth in its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the burning bush. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. In majesty he is like, or the one separated from his brothers, according to our footnote down here. In majesty he is like a firstborn bull, his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he will gore the nations, even those of the ends of the earth. Such are the 10,000s of Ephraim, such are the thousands of Manasseh. About Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and you, Issachar, in your tents. They will summon peoples to the mountain, and there offer sacrifices of righteousness. They will feast on the abundance of the seas, on the treasures hidden in the sand. About Gad he said, Blessed is he who enlarges Gad's domain. Gad lives there like a lion, tearing at arm or head. He chose the best place for himself. The leader's portion was kept for him. With the heads of the people assembled, he carried out the Lord's righteous will and his judgments concerning Israel. About Dan he said, Dan is a lion's cub springing out of Bashan. About Naphtali he said, Naphtali is abounding with the favor of the Lord, and is full of his blessing. He will inherit southward to the lake. About Asher he said, Most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. The bolts of your gates will be iron and bronze, and your strength will equal your days. Now remember, Jacob had given a blessing to his sons upon his death at the end of Genesis. In Genesis 49, Jacob had blessed his sons, the people who would be the leaders of the tribes of Israel, and he had given them a blessing based on their individual attributes and characteristics and their histories. So now Moses is giving them blessings too, giving the tribes blessings too. In some cases, he kind of goes along with what Jacob had said, and in some cases, he kind of gives a slightly different blessing. For example, Jacob had called Benjamin a ravenous wolf who devours prey and plunder, and here in Deuteronomy, Moses calls Benjamin, the tribe Benjamin, the beloved of the Lord, and the one the Lord loves. So there is a slight update to some of these blessings, but it's the same idea that Moses was blessing Israel the way that Jacob blessed his sons upon his death. So now he goes on to finish his speech by saying this. There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, there's that Jeshurunite word again, who rides on the heavens to help you, and on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemy before you, saying, Destroy him! So Israel will live in safety alone. Jacob's spring is secure, in a land of grain and new wine where the heavens drop dew. Blessed are you, O Israel! Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? He is your shield and helper, and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will trample down their high places, or tread upon their bodies. That's it. That's the last words of Moses. All we have to do left now is kill him. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There, the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, that's the Mediterranean, of course, the Negev, and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Remember Zoar? That was one of the 5 cities of the plain, the one that Lot actually took refuge in. So it wasn't destroyed with the others, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. because Lot took refuge, at least briefly. He eventually left there and went to a cave. That's Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, or he was buried in Moab. Apparently God himself did the burying in this case, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day no one knows where his grave is. I don't know what day that was that's being talked about there. Obviously somebody added this text at some point later in time, but who knows when. Moses was 120 years old when he died. Yet his eyes were not weak, nor was his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled... Now, let's see here. So they're going to be spending a month here before they move on. Apparently, all of Deuteronomy happens on one day, and we read back way at the beginning of the book that this is what, the 40th year after they came out of Egypt, the first day of the 11th month. So they spend the 30 days of the 11th month mourning for Moses. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him, and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, and again, I don't know how much longer afterwards it's taking place. Somebody would have added this little bit of commentary there at the end at some point in time, but who knows when. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Not really face to face, because we read earlier that Moses couldn't see God's face. The face-to-face concept here doesn't mean literally eyeball to eyeball as much as more directly. God was speaking to Moses more directly than he spoke to anybody else, and would apparently do so until Jesus came along. You know, the prophet like Moses that he was talking about in the previous chapter of Deuteronomy ends up being Jesus. Now, there will be other prophets along the way. There will be other men that God speaks to, that gives visions and dreams to and communicates with, and intends for that person to speak his message to the people. There will even be women who do this. None of them write anything down that we have in our Bibles, but God is going to use these spokesmen. For a while they're going to be called seers, and then later on they'll become prophets. Eventually it will become kind of like a national office, as the prophet speaks to the king and consults with the king and advises the king based on what God tells him. Before that, in the days when before they have a kingship, the prophets seem to be more local in nature, and they're called seers. And apparently, you know, they were scattered around the country, and that's where you went to consult God. You went to the house of the local seer. That's what Saul does with Samuel, because Samuel was a seer. And Samuel, in fact, even has like a little circuit, a tour that he takes throughout Israel as he goes from town to town, and advises the people based on whatever message he gets from God. So they had this process in place of prophets coming and speaking to the people, and later on speaking to the kings. But apparently there was a difference between all those guys and the way that God spoke with Moses. Now, I've never been inspired by God to speak a message straight from him. I've never had his words put in my mouth. I've never talked to him face to face. I've never communicated with him in that fashion. I don't know what that's like. I don't know what that experience is like. I've never known anybody who's known that. I don't know what that experience is like. I don't really know how to explain it, because I've never experienced it. I've never seen it done. I've never read anybody who's experienced it. The written revelation of God, of course, is finished. But there is something different. But from all the prophets that came along, and there were others, there is something different about the way God spoke with Moses compared to them until the days of Jesus. And so Jesus comes along and becomes a prophet like Moses. Not the only other prophet that God would ever use, but there is something different about the way God spoke with Moses and Jesus compared to all the prophets that came in between, or even afterwards, because there are still prophets in the New Testament times, even during the early days of the church. So God was still communicating in that fashion at least for a generation or two beyond the founding of the church, and who knows how long. I really don't know. God can communicate however he wants to. I'm not going to limit God and say he can't communicate by sending a prophet. If he wants to do that, I'm not going to say he can't. Now, I don't think he's going to ever add to his written revelation again. But like we saw, like we'll see in Acts, there will be prophets in the world even after the church is formed. I believe that where the written revelation of God is complete and easily available and distributable, God has no need for spoken prophets any longer. I think there is a possibility he might still use them in certain instances when the word is being preached in a land that it hasn't been spoken in yet, and the written word is not easily available. But in today's day and time, I don't know how many places in the world that would actually be. So I've never seen it. I don't think it happens here. I've never seen it done. I've never experienced it. I've never really heard any credible stories of anybody who has experienced it. But whatever it's like, Moses experienced that in a unique way that none of the other prophets did until Jesus. So anyway, since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all these miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. So that's it for Moses. Moses is now dead. The story is not yet complete, however. The works of Moses are complete, but the story of the Israelites getting back into their land is not complete. We need to read Joshua for that. Joshua is kind of like an epilogue to the story started in Genesis of the Israelites needing to go back to their land. It's like the last chapter. So we'll get to Joshua. I was going to do that today, but like I said, when I was doing my last set of videos on Deuteronomy, I bungled the recording for the last one, so I had to go back and do this first. But Joshua is next. After I do Joshua, I'm going to do Job. Joshua basically forms the sixth part of the six-parter from Genesis to Joshua. Now, it's not part of the same category of books of Moses. Okay, we have the Torah, which is the instruction, the law Moses gave. It also forms the Pentateuch, which means 5 books, which is Genesis and Deuteronomy. And Genesis and Deuteronomy have their own internal structure. I thought about that when we read Leviticus, how Leviticus itself has a chiastic internal structure that hints at the nature of the book. And Leviticus itself is the middle point of the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, with Genesis and Deuteronomy being the opening and closing, Exodus and Numbers being the inner parts, and then Leviticus being like the central section. So those 5 books themselves form a unit, form a narrative whole. But they don't finish the story of the Israelites entering the land. And that goes all the way back to the beginning of Genesis when Abraham was first called. Joshua does that. So you do kind of need Joshua to form the ending of that story that completes the account of the Israelites getting back into their land. So Joshua is important in that sense. There's nothing to do with the law in there, but it does finish the story begun in Genesis about them actually entering the land and taking possession of it. So we're going to do that. We're going to read Joshua, and then we're going to take a sidestep and go over and read Job. And that's the order that we're going to be doing these in. Let's see if I do it right this time.